All right. I had my hand up because I was trying to keep an eye on it, but I didn't do that right. Oh well. I'm still figuring out. I'm new to streaming, but I'm still figuring out how this goes. And I just had a few thoughts. Well, I was getting ready to go to bed, and I had a few thoughts that I thought I wanted to get up out of my mind. But I was thinking about the socio-sexual hierarchy. I'm a big fan of Vox Days, and I like um, his social-sexual hierarchy. The thing that he does, and he does it often, that I think makes it confusing for people. It's not a problem with the structure itself, the hierarchy itself, but there's a conflation. And here's what happens: if you say that somebody, okay, if you say that that person is a fool, it's a different statement than if you say that that person is acting foolish or being foolish. One, excuse me, one refers to their behavior currently. The other refers to them as an individual. Like it's a defining. I don't know if defining is the correct word. It's a characteristic of that individual. And one of the problems that Vox has, and it's not a huge deal, but it is. I think it creates confusion and it creates frustration. It also creates the what am I attitude. Is he often talks about people as being a gamma or being an alpha or being a bravo or being a sigma or whatever it is, being a delta. It's like that guy's a delta. That guy's a delta. That guy's a gamma. That guy's a this. And so he's putting characteristics on people. But he talks about the socio-sexual hierarchy as a behavioral pattern, as a way that we interact with each other. So is it the way that you act, or is it who you are? And those things get confused. And part of the problem is simply the way that we explain things as people. But I think the problem's a little deeper than that as well. It's interesting to think about how you can take the world and break it up in programming. You call it like you have like object oriented programming, where you make everything an object, and then you make another object, and those objects interact with each other. Well, we do that in our lives as well. We compartmentalize things. We take it and put it into a box, and it's really common when you get into like. Oh, come on, reconnection successful. Are we back? Are we back? I'm gonna say we're back. Never had this problem. Anyways, the problem that you run into is when you're describing a behavioral pattern and you put it into a characterization. Naturally, you're going to get you're going to create labels for people. This person's a this person's a this, and it's accurate enough in explaining it. Oh, that person's a gamma, from a superficial explanation. And Vox is really big into the macro, which is fine. That's his viewpoint, is he's big into the macro. But he's constantly talking, and he's constantly saying that, oh, that person's a this, that person's a this. And that goes towards the micro. That goes towards, okay, I'm putting a label on this person, and you're classifying a person as an object in a schema. And I don't know if that's going towards the micro, but either way, it's one of those things that you can't really. There's a philosophy that it encourages, which has to do with putting people in a box. As far as, okay, this person's a this. It takes a lot of energy to think of somebody as to not just put somebody within a box. Am I live? Come now. Let me open it up on another tab and see what's going on. See if I can figure this out before the thought leaves my brain. Let's see. Nope, not you. Let's go you. Come now. Tell me now. am I live? Okay, sorry. All right. Anyways, getting back to it, what Vox does is he puts people in a cat like, okay, I really like the social sexual hierarchy because it explains behavioral patterns. It explains how people interact with each other within a group. It is also fractal, which means it can expand to a lot of different. I mean, it just repeats itself, group after group after group. Whether you're in a big group or a small group, there is a repeating factor, but it's a pattern, and you notice that pattern. The thing that I think Vox does that makes it less understandable is that he when speaking of people, he puts them in a clear label or in a camp or in a characteristic, and I don't think that's wrong to do in speaking about it, but he's constantly having to remind people, I don't care about you. It's not what about me. It's not what am I. And he has to remind people that, partially because he's constantly saying that guy's a gamma, that guy's a alpha, that guy's a this, and so it gets people into this thought process that it's a characterization. One of the problems that I personally have with thinking of it as a characterization comes to my belief or understanding on Christ, and I think that through Christ's atonement, through Christ's suffering, we can change and become better. That's the whole part of. That's one of the huge examples that Christ gave us, is that death and rebirth, that being born again, that changing, putting off the natural man and aligning yourself with God. And that means changing your behavior and becoming a new creature, becoming a new person, becoming a new, just new in who you are. And so if you invest yourself in thinking of people as within a characteristic, you're probably not going to be too far wrong, because honestly, people don't usually change that much. It's little by little, and over the life of their lifetime, they'll change. And there are events, like you look at Paul, Saul, who became Paul. Like there are events that change people, that actually clearly change people to become a new person. But that's pretty rare. And so if you think of somebody as, oh, that's a gamma or that's a this, you're probably going to be. I mean, if you've pinned it down right, and if you understand the person well enough, and if you're intimate enough with the person, then you're probably going to be fairly accurate. But that also cuts out that person's ability to become reborn or become new or become. You're kind of putting someone in a box, and that's. I always think that it's important to avoid that. I've seen it with, like, you look at. There's self-help books, or there's parenting books where it's like, oh, your child's a type C5, or your child's a this, or, I mean, you look at the Myers-Briggs, and you look at all of these different classifications, and so much of it is focused around putting a person in a box, saying this is this type of person. And so there's utility in that. There's something okay, there's something useful in that, as far as when you don't know someone very well, it gives you an idea of how to interact with them in a way that's going to be smooth, that's not going to be clunky or hard. But it also, there's a danger in that as well, is you're creating a label for somebody that you just put them in. And so that's the thought that I was thinking, that I wanted to get out while I was thinking about it. But you see it, I guess what I was saying is you can see it in a lot of places where, okay, this self-help, or okay, this parenting book, or okay, this psychology book, they're putting people in boxes so that you can interact with those people. But that extends further into, like, you look at the oh, that person's a liberal, oh, that person's a SJW, or oh, that person's a conservative, or oh, we do it in all different aspects of life. And it makes sense, it's natural, it's something that we're going to do, but it also, you need to be weary of that, because it does undercut your ability to view that person. It's like, you can think of experiences. Most people can probably think of experiences where somebody will come up to them and they'll be like, oh, I've been trying to understand you, but once I figured out you did this, I knew you were that kind of person. And it's like, then they stop trying to understand you. Then they stop trying to get to know you. Then they stop trying to actually learn about you. and that's a dangerous thing. Once you think you know about somebody, that's where your pride comes in, and you're like, oh, I already know that. And when you look at it, and you look at Vox in his behavior, he gets really, and it seems like, and I don't know like what he's going through and stuff, and this is a just from the outsider's perspective, but when you hear him talk about like things like IQ and things like stuff that he knows really well, he does have these gamma tells where he's like, no, you're wrong, and he snaps, and he's tart, and he's really abrasive and stuff, and it's one of the things that reminds me of a guy who really loves Star Trek, and you called Captain Picard, you call him something different or something, and it's like, it's not how do you say it? It's just a behavioral pattern. It's just a way that somebody reacts in a situation. It's not that who he is or anything like that. It's just an interesting side note, I guess you could say. That being said, I really like the social sexual hierarchy. I think that it's a neat system to help you understand the world around you. And that's what we're all trying to do, is figure out what's going on around us. Well, that's all I've got. So have a good night, guys.